This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by The Athletic, premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
It's our signing day special next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper in the corner. Waits for it. Is caught. This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson. Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic. Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team, and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I am Steve Deace. Thank you for being patient. We decided to wait an extra day for this week's episode so that we can give you full bore coverage of National Signing Day, which, if you're a Michigan fan, this year is not very special. But we'll have all the coverage and more. Want to thank our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to get the word out about this each and every week. Those of you that subscribe to the audio version on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And those of you subscribing right here at YouTube as well. While you're here, please give us a like on this video. Consider subscribing. We've crossed over 2,000 subscribers here on our YouTube channel, so we're very, very thankful for that. Coming up on this week's episode, again, wall-to-wall coverage of Michigan's 2018 recruiting class. You're going to see a highlight montage of every one of Michigan's signees in just a few moments. Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor will be joining us. We're also going to talk about how important are recruiting rankings really? Because it is true that you can build a very successful program by defying them, as, say, Wisconsin has done right here in the Big Ten. But it's really hard to win a national championship by defying them. We'll have the actual data on that and more coming up on this week's episode. But we begin with some opening talking points about the 2018 class, which did not end with a bang, but a whimper. Well, unless that bang is Michigan getting repeatedly clubbed over its head. Let's begin. Why did Michigan's class finish so weakly? Well, obviously it's the results on the field. Look at the end of the year. 3 losses to close the season. That game against South Carolina, particularly, was a nationally televised embarrassment. So when you're up against the big boys, the heavy hitters for elite prospects like Nicholas Petit-Frere, and you close your season the way we did, and a school like Ohio State closes its season the way they did, well, unless he just loves your school and your coaching staff better, so there's a personal stake or relationship, Young man like that's going to do the math on his own too, and he's going to sign with Ohio State, which is exactly what Petit Frere did today. So the close to Michigan's season obviously was a huge detriment to the close to this recruiting class at the same time. Which brings us to our next point. Be very thankful the early signing period was introduced this year. It came at a good time for Michigan. Otherwise, this class could have potentially ended even worse. I think of a young man like that, Aiden Hutchinson, who blew up at the U.S. Army All-American game. The lone 5-star in Michigan's class, Cameron McGrone, who was elevated to a 5-star by 24/7 Sports after his performance in the offseason All-Star games as well. Could you imagine, maybe Aiden Hutchinson as a legacy, he would have held on, but can you imagine the Sooners if we had one signing day, and it was today, and this was the lone 5-star in Michigan's class, Cameron McGrone, if he had not signed on December 20th in that early signing period, could you imagine trying to hold on to him? Yikes. So it could have been, if not for the early signing period. I mean, if we're agreeing with the logic that the way Michigan finished the season, including that bowl game, were a detriment to the close of the recruiting season, well, imagine if we had to recruit every single one of these young men all the way until February 7th. In light of that bowl game, it could have been even worse. Next, Michigan's class was also hurt by a lack of immediate playing time that the previous two classes offered. I mean, one of the reasons why, just even beyond demographics, tradition, etc., one of the things that helps the Ohio States, the Clemsons, the Alabamas, just to reload in the recruiting rankings every year, and now Georgia is getting up there as well, they're losing so many guys early to the NFL that new guys come in and even at these elite programs think, I can play right away. I think of a young man, Patrick Surtain Jr., I'm getting old enough to remember watching his old man. He was considered an LSU lean this entire time. And today he signed with Alabama. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Alabama lost its entire starting secondary to the National Football League, and there's chances for a young man like that to come in and play right away. We could offer that to players like Rashawn Gary and others in the last two classes. Given the amount of production we have returning on our team, we've got one of the most experienced teams returning this coming fall. There aren't a lot of immediate opportunities for playing time, so I think that was always going to hurt Michigan's class as well. And then you throw in the way we finished the season, those two things together, and that's a difficult dynamic. Which brings us to this point. Michigan finished behind several schools in the recruiting rankings that just made head coaching changes. In fact, I'm looking at it right now, and you can see it on your screen as well. Look at the 4 schools immediately ahead of us. Nebraska, Florida, Tennessee, Texas A&M. They just fired their coaches, guys, or they just lost their coaches. There's UCLA up to 16. They fired their coach, too. There's Oregon at 15. They lost their coach. All right, I mean, what is that, 6 schools? Think about that. 6 schools. 6. I'm going to have to pause to start cutting myself. 6 schools that made coaching changes finished with better recruiting classes than Michigan. There's a lot more I could say about that, but it would probably alienate every subscriber we have. So I'm just going to move on now. Here's some good news. Here are some players that aren't included in the recruiting class rankings that are likely going to figure and factor heavily for Michigan this fall. Casey Hughes, the defensive back transfer from Utah, and Shea Patterson, the quarterback transfer from Ole Miss, who I do believe will be eligible this fall. If they were to be in this year's recruiting classes, Patterson would probably be a 5-star, Casey Hughes probably a 3-star. If you add those two guys to Michigan's current recruiting class point total, they're going to finish ahead of many of the schools with the new coaches I just mentioned. Still not a great class, or at least the class we were hoping for, but it does. And when you look at the recruiting rankings, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of times, instead of looking at where you're placed, you have to look at where you're tiered. I mean, where Texas and Georgia and Ohio State are, their point totals, they're really close to each other, and they're at a different level than everybody else. And then you look at the next few schools, like 4 through 10 are separated by like 15 points. Then you look at the next tier of schools, they're separated by anywhere from 15 to 20 points. So we're really talking about a player or two. All right? And so if you add those two young men who are going to be, I think, factors on Michigan's depth chart this fall, that would change the complexion of this year's class for the better, and that should be noted. So it's not all bad news, I suppose. And it's still a class ranked higher than most of Harbaugh's classes while at Stanford. As you just saw in the latest rankings at the time we're taping this, Michigan has fallen to 23. When we put that data point into our open, Michigan, I think, was at 17 or 18. Harbaugh's highest ranked class at Stanford was 21. So most of his classes were anywhere from 21 to 25. So this class is more in line with the sorts of classes Harbaugh was recruiting at Stanford. And obviously, he had a lot of success there, and those classes set the stage for the success David Shaw has continued to have at Stanford, even up until this very moment. 2 more points to ponder about this recruiting class. Length and speed were emphasized in this class. I think only one Michigan signee measures in at shorter than 6'1". Obviously, a lot of athleticism in this class as well, but we're dealing more with low 4s and high 3-star guys. And what does that typically mean? That typically means guys who are athletically gifted, may have undefined positions, like a Michael Barrett, who's a player that I think has a chance to be one of the few immediate contributors on this year's team. But, the problem is, what's his position? When you're dealing with guys that are the high 4-stars to 5-star players, you're not just getting athletic excellence, but you're getting guys, we've seen their skill set. We know how they project at a high level at college football. When you're dealing more with the high 3-star, low 4-star guys, those are more guys that athletically are very gifted, but they need to be developed. They're in between 2 or 3 different positions right now, and that would define a lot of the classes that Harbaugh had at Stanford, and I think that's a good description of the class that Coach Harbaugh signed today. Now, Michigan, the good news is already off to a very good start in the 2019 class. McGrone is the only top 100 recruit in the 2018 class. Depending on which service you look at, Michigan already has 3 players that are ranked in the top 100 for 2019, and that's good, but if the Wolverines finish on the field this fall, the way they did this year, that 2019 class is going to collapse at the end, just like the 2018 one did. So what to make of the 2018 class? Well, make of it what you will with your own eyes. Here's a highlight montage of every one of the young men who have signed on to be a part of the Michigan Wolverines. If you're not yet a Patreon supporter for Michigan Podcast, take a look at what you missed immediately following Michigan's huge win over Michigan State. We had an instant reaction podcast for our supporters, breaking it all down right there at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And again, we want to thank all of you who helped to cover some of the costs, the overhead it takes to produce this, really, for YouTube anyway, a high-level production, the graphics and everything else. You know, as my old college roommate Mike Bartram used to say, romance without finance, a damn nuisance, right? So, I mean, someone had to pay for all the equipment, and someone had to supply the mediocre talent that you are watching right now. So thank you to those of you on our Patreon page that are contributing to help make this possible. And you too can contribute as well and get extra special content exclusively for you by being one of our Patreon supporters. Joined now on our National Signing Day special by our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor, who is back from his honeymoon. Good to see you, Michael.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. Signing Day special, huh? What's special about today?
Well, it's special can have numerous meanings. Some of them are not good, but this has been a disappointing day for Michigan football. And if you look at the class in and of itself as an isolated incident, we didn't have a huge class to offer scholarships to. One of the reasons that helps Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson et al. Just reload with these top classes every year is they're losing so many guys to the NFL every year that those top players are attracted to the early playing time. We don't have a lot of early playing time to offer. It was a down year in both New Jersey and Michigan combined, which are right now our two primary recruiting stomping grounds, or two of the primary ones anyway. So there were some baked into the cake factors here. But when you look at this series of unfortunate events where you hire Dan Enos for 17 days, where Pep and Drevno, and I don't even know if I even feel strongly about firing them, but a lot of fans are not happy that it appears they're going to stay. The embarrassment that was that bowl game just goes, it's been one after another. It's like the old Punch-Out video game, and we're Glass Joe right now. Mike, we're just here taking body blow, body blow, body blow. Where does it end for Michigan football? Because when you watched a kid that you offered first, you scheduled your bowl practices at his school, signed with Ohio State today, and then you watch a young man who gave up on you a couple of weeks ago in the recruiting process to sign with a school that just fired, or just lost, I should say, his position coach. And that is the one position we had some playing time available, was at tackle. We didn't meet that need in this class really at all. So what's going on here?
Man, that was normally it's my job to bring us down, isn't it, Steve? So that was a little depressing. But, you know, when I look at it, you said, when does it end? When does the gut punch end? Well, it better end on September 1st when Michigan plays Notre Dame under the lights down in South Bend. I mean, there's really nothing. Today was an opportunity for Michigan to create some momentum going into the 2018, offseason, and they weren't able to do that. The next opportunity is if Shea Patterson gets cleared by the NCAA to play next year. But you know what? That's not something that Michigan has control over. And if it doesn't go Michigan's way, that's going to be another kick in the gut. Hopefully everything we've been heard is that it should go Michigan's way. I know you've talked about that a little bit, Steve, why this makes sense for the NCAA to clear him. But that's an opportunity. Spring ball is going to be what spring ball is going to be, which is an opportunity for guys to practice and for us to talk about football, but really not an opportunity for us to answer any question marks, because those things are just going to persist through the summer until we see more results. And those results come in September 1st against Notre Dame. Then a couple weeks later, you got Michigan State and Ohio State and Penn State, Wisconsin. And so, no, it's going to be a long offseason. And hopefully, instead of taking kicks to the gut, Michigan is kicking people when we get to next football season. I cannot underscore the importance of the 2018 football season, and you understand this, Steve, very well, because when you look at it, and I thought there was a terrific article by Nick Baumgartner from the Detroit Free Press that came out just a couple hours ago that I read, and I said on my show on Wednesday, is that you sell hope and promise in the future the first couple of years, and you look at the 2016 and 2017 recruiting classes for Michigan, and it's very clear that the Michigan program was selling the idea that they were going to contend and compete for championships. And after that, you have to sell results. And there's really no results for Michigan to sell right now. 2016 ended with a whimper. 2017 was a complete and utter abomination. And so where they're at right now is they're going to have a class like this, because what are they selling to these kids that compares to Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama and Georgia and USC and even Penn State, who's won a Big Ten championship and went to a better bowl game than Michigan this past year. And so 2018 is so critically important because you have to sell results, or you're going to end up with another class in 2019 like we just signed in 2018. And then instead of talking about, getting this program to a championship level in 2019 and really starting to contend and be on Ohio State's level, then you're looking at, a long 8-10-year plan of long-term development. And that's not what we signed up for when Michigan landed Jim Harbaugh.
All right, before we draw any more long-term conclusions from what's going on with our football program right now, let's do this. Let's take a step back. We're one of two out of 12 schools in the country to have top 10 recruiting classes 2 of the last 4 years. The 3 recruiting classes that Jim has signed, their average ranking is number 10. This class, according to a couple of services that still have it in the top 20, would still be ranked higher than any of his classes at Stanford were. The highest ranking I think any of his classes at Stanford had was, I think, 20 or 21, so right around there. Is it possible we're overreacting to this? I just want to throw that out there before we draw any more disconcerting long-term conclusions. Are we just overreacting to this possibly, Michael?
It is possible that 2018 is a one-year anomaly on the recruiting cycle, but that's only the case. And it's possible that 2017 football season, when Michigan football went 8-5, was a one-year anomaly. And the seasons preceding it, winning 10 games in both 2015 and 2016, although I say the 10 games won in 2016 was a disappointment considering where they were. But it's possible that we're just in this one-year cycle of the exception to the rule. And going forward, the 2019 is a great recruiting class because Michigan football goes up there and plays really well in 2018 and has the Georgia effect, or has the Miami effect, or has the Penn State effect. And in 2019, Michigan is winning a championship, and the 2020 class is fantastic. That's what we can hope for, Steve, certainly. But when I look at the one concern I have when I look at this class is, here we are 3 years into the Jim Harbaugh tenure, and did this class help you get any closer to competing for that ultimate prize, which is the national championship? Did this class help you get any closer to competing with Ohio State and Georgia and Clemson and Alabama and Oklahoma? And I think even the most ardent, fervent, loyal fan for Michigan would probably say, no, it didn't help you get it that much closer. And so, people look at Stanford and say what he was able to develop with 3-star recruits and then some 4-star recruits. But, I think Stanford is a little bit of a, it was an unfinished product by the time Jim Harbaugh left. So we don't really ever know to what degree he was going to achieve at. We don't know if the program peaked in his final year when they, won 11 games and won an Orange Bowl, and great success, certainly. But was that program going to be able to take it to the next level and compete for a national championship? We're not sure. Stanford has not been able to do that since. They've been a very good program, a steady program under David Shaw, but they've never been able to take it to that next level. And so I think it's unfair of us to say, well, look where he was proceeding with Stanford, because where he was, he might have been at the top of the mountain. Now, if he takes Michigan to the same mountaintop that he did at Stanford, and that is a New Year's Day 6 bowl game victory and 11 wins, then fine. I think people will be pretty excited about that, but that's not a championship. That's not a national championship, and it's not a conference championship.
What's the mood there in Ann Arbor? I am I'm a Walmart Wolverine. I didn't go to school there. I moved to Grand Rapids when I was 9-10 years old and got hooked on Steve Smith, Anthony Carter, Rick Rogers and that gang, and I've been a fan, diehard, no matter where I've lived in America ever since. But I'm not tied in to the epicenter there like you are. You're talking to the local fan base, which would, being closest to the situation, you would assume would be the most rational, lucid, informed. So what's the mood there locally right now?
Ooh, boy, I wish I could tell you that it was better than it is. I mean, on the radio show today, we had generally speaking, and we don't screen callers like a bigger station like 97.1 with Mike Valenti. They're probably getting, 25, 30 callers every hour, and they're screening through and trying to put on what I would consider the biggest doofuses. But on our show, we essentially, if you call up and you're not a raving lunatic, we're going to put you on the air. And on our show on Wednesday, on National Signing Day, I think we had 9 callers in our 2 hours, and I didn't get one of those 9 callers that was preaching patience, that was talking about, hey, this is an okay class, that we're excited about it, that Michigan football is on the right path. Everybody that called up was moaning and groaning and talking about why are we here, where are the results, why is it more hype than substance. I think the fan base is getting angrier and angrier. And I'll tell you a story. When we were coming back from our honeymoon, my wife and I got in the car, and we had an Uber driver, and he had a Purdue sweatshirt on. I thought he was a Purdue basketball fan. I was going to talk to him about it, and he said, no, I'm actually a Michigan football fan. And he was really, really angry to the point we're talking about he wanted to fire Jim Harbaugh. And here I am, as you know, Steve, I'm usually more of a realistic and critical person, and yet here I was trying to tell this guy, like, take a step back. Let's see what happens in 2018. They're still with this roster, with the guys like Rashawn Gary and the defense, and hopefully some burgeoning prospects on the offensive side of the ball. I'm looking at 2018, but I'm flat out saying that after 2018, we're going to be able to properly levy a grade and properly levy a judgment about this coaching staff, about where this program is, because 2017 you were young. There's no excuses in 2018. I don't want to hear about redshirt freshman offensive tackles because they're your guys and because you've had 4 years to build towards it. And so 2018 to me, I'm trying to teach myself some patience for this offseason and not lose my cool every single day, Steve. But 2018 football season is going to tell us one thing or another. And hopefully we're sitting here next year talking about a great recruiting class for 2019. We're celebrating a championship and a victory over Ohio State and Michigan State. But if we're not, that's going to answer every question we have about this Michigan coaching staff and this program and where it's headed.
So, as mutual fans, let's tackle the question that a lot of people that don't have a rooting interest in Michigan are trolling us with, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong either. So let's discuss this for just a second as we close this out, Michael. Is it possible, given how much more competitive the league is now, how much more competitive Michigan State is now, and of course their situation is somewhat up in the air because of what their campus is going through, but let's set that awful story aside for a minute and assume it doesn't disrupt the flow of power in the football program, which I doubt that will be the case, but let's assume that it is. This is the best Michigan State football has been since Duffy Doherty, Biggie Munn, before you and I were born. But also the Big Ten wasn't as good outside of how good Michigan State was as it is right now. The demographics in the Midwest, where you've seen the erosion culturally of jobs, the manufacturing base, the flock to the South that we are seeing, which has greatly helped Southeastern Conference recruiting with so many more players in their own backyard now. When you look at all the demographics, you look at there's probably certain places Michigan, you and I would agree, is making more, I don't want to call them compromises, let's say willing to make more maneuvers now to win than they have been in the past. But there's probably always going to be a place that Michigan's not willing to go, that maybe some others are willing to go to do that. It's probably, though, not as highfalutin as most Michigan fans think, but I'm sure there's at least some place they won't go to. So given all of these realities, is it possible we just may never be a dominant football program again? I mean, look at Notre Dame. They're not a dominant football program. Every few years, they can cycle up and be nationally relevant. But Brian Kelly's got a lot more 8-9 win seasons there than he does 11 and 12 win seasons. So is that possible? I don't want to contemplate it, but we're getting trolled with this question now. And I think we have to ask ourselves if, given the accommodations and maneuvers we're willing to allow Harbaugh to perform and his resume coming in, I mean, if he can't get you there, maybe you just can't get there. And maybe we need to maybe we need to be charged on one end as customers, and then as fans on the other, maybe we need to be more realistic accordingly. I don't want that to be true, but we're getting trolled with that question now. So what's your response to it?
I think, honestly, that you're probably right. I think that is a world that Michigan fans don't really want to consider as the likelihood. But I will say this, if Michigan doesn't win in 2018 or 2019, doesn't win a championship, doesn't make a college football playoff and show that it can compete with those programs, their job's going to get so much harder because what you just said, I mean, the Midwest is shrinking in terms of a recruiting base for the Wolverines, and they don't recruit Ohio very well. The one state that is consistently producing that type of top talent, Michigan doesn't really recruit from. And so if Michigan wants to be a national program, that you look at their success in New Jersey, you look at it in Florida, you look at it in Georgia, you look at it in California, and to continue to be able to compete in those states, they're going to have to produce results at a much higher level than they're producing because Georgia is clearly circling the wagon in their own state, and they're giving prospects a reason to stay home. Florida with Miami making a resurgence, and now Florida State and with Willie Taggart, and Florida with Dan Mullen, if they make a resurgence, they're going to give their in-state prospects another reason to stay home. I don't think Rutgers is ever going to be a contender in New Jersey, but other programs are going to go in there. Penn State's going to go in there more consistently like they have been. Notre Dame's going in there. Maryland's going in there. So there's a lot more competitors for those areas that Michigan's been successful at recruiting. And when you look at it, they don't win in these next couple of years, their job recruiting those areas gets that much tougher. And the idea that Michigan's ever going to be on par with Alabama, I mean, I think if we're being realistic right now, Steve, we should probably say that Michigan's never going to be on par with Alabama. Now, in all fairness, nobody's on par with Alabama. But can Michigan beat Clemson? Can Michigan beat Georgia? Can Michigan beat Oklahoma? Right now, if you look at the last 10 years, there's only been one team that's outside of the Southeast or the South or the far West that's been able to do that. That's Ohio State. Nobody else has come close. Notre Dame's had, a little bit of success here and there, but nobody else in the Big Ten has been able to do it. You look at, even in the ACC, but further up the coast, nobody's been able to do it. In the Pac-12, Washington's they're there, but they're not really there when they get to the ultimate level. So I'm looking at this and saying it might just be that college football becomes dominated by the SEC, some teams in the ACC, Texas, Oklahoma, and the Southern California schools. And that might just be it. And if that is, then the reality for Michigan fans is waking up to a world where you can't compete for a national championship, and we're going to all have to readjust our expectations of what is a successful season. The good news is that you can still win your conference because you're really looking at only one other team in Ohio State that is recruiting at that really high level. Penn State's good, Michigan State's good, Wisconsin, Nebraska's going to be a good team to look at. But you can win your conference. You can win 10 games a year, but it's going to end there. It's going to end with having to settle for a New Year's Six bowl game and taking your satisfaction from going 11-2, 10-3, that type of success, and winning your New Year's Six game and maybe going to Indianapolis if the world that you're talking about ends up coming to fruition.
Well, what you just described is Stanford. As great of a program as they've been, they've never really been a competitor for a playoff spot yet, but they're perennially a contender in the Pac-12, Pac-10, so that's kind of the program you just described. Michael, good to see you. I know you have to go. Thanks for joining us here on a busy signing day.
Yeah, thanks, guys, very much. We'll talk to you next week.
So do recruiting rankings matter? They do, and they don't. We'll discuss that next. There's a look at The Athletic, our partners here on Michigan Podcast, some of the best online sports commentary you'll find anywhere on the interwebs over at The Athletic. And right now, through our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast, you can get a discounted subscription to The Athletic. Promo code DSP, D as in David, SP as in Paul, DSP, promo code DSP at theathletic.com. So invariably, when your school has a disappointing year in recruiting rankings, you go to the tried and true, well, they're overrated anyway. Well, are they? Well, they kind of are, but they're really not. You know me, if you watch this show on a regular basis, I like data. I like facts, not venting opinions. So let's look at what the data shows. Looking over the playoff era, and we're going to use the recruiting rankings according to 24/7 Sports because I like the way they do the composite rankings of the major services. Okay, so here were the 4-year recruiting rankings of every playoff team since this started in 2014. There you see Alabama, number one class every year. Florida State's lowest class leading up to its playoff appearance in 2014 was 11th. Ohio State, top 6 class every year. Oregon, its lowest ranking leading up to 2014 was 21. How about 2015? Alabama again, number one class every year. Clemson, 20, 15, 16, and then 9. Michigan State only had one top 25 class in the 4 years leading up to its playoff appearance in 2015. I think they played itself out when they faced Alabama in that national semifinal. And there you see Oklahoma. They were between 12 and 16 all 4 years prior to their 2015 playoff appearance. What about 2016? Alabama, number one every year. Clemson, 15, 16, 9, 11. Ohio State, 3 top 4 classes. Its lowest class was number 7. And there you see Washington, who had only one top 25 class leading up to its playoff appearance, and they had one class that finished as low as 38. And then this past year, 2017, Alabama again, number one every year. Clemson, 16, 9, 11, 16. Georgia, 8, 6, 6, 3. So they had top 8 classes all 4 years. And there again, Oklahoma was in the top 15 to 20 every single year in recruiting rankings as well. So let's draw some conclusions from these data points. Only 2 of the 16 teams to make the college football playoffs so far, Washington 27th, Michigan State 30th, did not average top 25 recruiting classes in the 4 years leading up to their appearance. Okay? Only 2. Now, if you look at Michigan's 4-year ranking heading in to this year, it's right around 19. All right? It's right around, depending on how you round the decimal point off, it's 19 or 20. That would be the last class of Brady Hoke and the first 3 classes of Jim Harbaugh. All right? So it's really hard if you're not averaging top 25 classes to make it to the playoff. The average 4-year recruiting class ranking of the other 14 teams to make the college football playoff, look at that. It's 8th. 8th. So yes, you can defy the rankings, but it's not the best route to success most of the time. Jimmy's and Joe's beats X's and O's. One more conclusion to this. Heading into the 2018 season, here are the only teams whose 4-year recruiting average is at least 8th. Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, and LSU. If the current trend holds, then at least half of the 4 teams to make the college football playoff are on that list right there. Throw that up there again if you guys don't mind. Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU. It's going to be one of those 4 teams that have averaged a recruiting ranking of at least 8th over the last 4 years. This week's Twitter question: what grade would you give Michigan's 2018 football recruiting class? We asked you. 48% of you would give it a B. That's being kind. 34% said C. I should have put B- up there. That's a good grade. B-. 14% said fail. 4% said A. Some of you are like, Steve, why are you bitching and moaning about a B- class? Well, because you're trying to beat a bunch of teams that are getting A classes. You know, I mean, it comes down to this, really, for me. If you're telling me we just can't compete with these teams, I'm okay with it. I'm an adult. I'm a 44-year-old middle-aged man. Disappointment is how I roll, okay? So I'm used to it. If you're telling me there's no return to glory forthcoming, we can be a solid, good program, hopefully maybe be a Stanford or Wisconsin, wherever they are right now, but there is no great historic run coming. Jimmy's not a magician. He can't fight demographics, and it is what it is. Okay. I mean, if we're going to be an 8 or 9 win kind of team, I mean, there's worse fates, right? Charge me accordingly then. I mean, this jersey I'm wearing right now was the gross domestic product of Botswana, all right? So if we're just going to be an 8 or 9 win team, then, you know, I'm giving my kid for his birthday this weekend a certificate to show him I'm taking to the Wisconsin game this fall. And that's going to cost me, you know, like half a mortgage payment. So if we're just going to be an 8 or 9 win team, I'm okay with that. Charge me accordingly. Don't charge me and you what it takes to pay for $4 million assistants and a $9 million a year coach. Okay. Question of the week. Kent Smith asks, who in this class do you see contributing right away? I think you'll see several guys on special teams, McGrone, Van Summeren. I think several others I think you'll see on special teams. But let me give you a name. I mentioned him earlier, so that was a bit of a tease. One guy I think could be a surprising contributor is Michael Barrett out of Valdosta, Georgia. He was the Offensive Player of the Year, Class 7A in Georgia. He's no joke. The problem is he doesn't have a defined position, right? So he played quarterback, but he's not really one. Frankly, he's the kind of guy, if I was down there in his backyard at Georgia Tech, I'd have been all over him to run my triple option. I think he's perfect for that scheme. But one of the things we could use an immediate opening for is a guy who can make plays in space on offense. We're still looking for more explosive playmakers on offense. Just got a hunch when you watch his film, you look at his bio, that maybe Michael Barrett's a guy similar to Chris Evans, similar recruiting profile, and he made an impact his freshman year. That's one guy I've got my eye on for this fall. Well, let us know what you think about what we think. You can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Also, you can follow our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast as well. If you ever miss anything we write, tweet, we broadcast, MichiganPodcast.com is the website. No show next week. Reminder, no show next week. We'll be back again on February 20th. Until then, hopefully the news is better. Go Blue.